Welcome to Season 4 of the Comfortably Hungry podcast, where yesterday's dinner is tomorrow's history. If you're a peckish person who is curious about the history of food and drink, then you're in the right place. I'm Sam Bilton, an author of some rather niche books who adores her history and food. And by the end of this podcast, I hope you'll be a fan of food history too. You can see what historical delicacies I'm cooking at the moment on Instagram, Threads or Blue Sky at Mrs. Bilton, that's with 2 S's. In Season 4, we're going to be immersing ourselves in the fascinating world of fresh water, which as we all know is vital to life. We'll be journeying through the centuries to learn more about the food, drink and medicines water provides, its spiritual significance, discovering how water has been used to prepare and preserve our victuals, and how water has been utilised as a source of power and transportation for the food sector. Some of the topics will be obvious, but as ever, I hope that 1 or 2 will be pleasantly surprising. As with earlier seasons of the Comfortably Hungry podcast, the guests will be invited to bring a dish to the season's virtual potluck supper. And we've had some delicious contributions, I can tell you. The paid subscribers to the Comfortably Hungry Substack will also get access to recipes inspired by the topics covered in this season. See you our little mill that clacks so busy by the brook? She has ground her corn and paid her tax ever since the Domesday book. By the time Rudyard Kipling wrote these lines in his poem Puck's Song in 1906, watermills were in steep decline. But watermills were once a prominent feature of our countryside, as historians Michael Fuller and Robert Spain note. No other type of building has had such great effect on our landscape. The appearance and development of mill ponds and watercourses, the tracks and roads associated with the mills, and industries which flourished, all affected the changing face of the land. When King William I ordered the Great Domesday Survey of 1066, nearly 6,000 watermills were identified in England. Most villages, especially those with a river or stream running through them, or that were situated close to a running water source, had a watermill. Many of these were built on the site of much older mills. There is archaeological evidence of the existence of Roman watermills in Britain, such as the one found at Ickham near Canterbury in Kent. Watermills predated the windmill, which appeared in Britain around the 12th century. They were a powerful source of energy in the days before industrialisation. Watermills were working buildings and were modernised and adapted to meet new economic demands as the centuries progressed. But few examples survive from the medieval era or earlier, not in their original state at least. When you start to dig into their history, their importance to the economy becomes quickly apparent. In Sussex, Kent and Surrey, many early watermills provided power for the hammers of the ironworks, where cannons were cast and cannonballs founded. Iron was a big deal in this part of Britain. Think back to episode 2 when we talked about the iron-rich waters of Tunbridge Wells in Kent. They were also used to manufacture paper for banknotes, vellum, gunpowder and snuff from tobacco, to name just a few of the industries that relied on water power. At one time, the River Wandle in Greater London supported nearly 100 working mills, despite only being 11 miles or 19 kilometres in length. One of these was a cloth mill that excelled in dyeing in scarlet. Their cloth was said to be much in demand for cardinals' hats. Somewhat ironic given that many of the employees were Huguenot refugees who had fled from persecution by the Catholic Church in the 16th century. But this is a food history podcast, so today we'll be looking at the history of the grain or corn watermill. And what better place to do this than at a restored watermill in Sussex? To help me understand how watermills have evolved are Barry and Chris Flannaghan of Burton Mill in Duncton, near Petworth, West Sussex. Welcome to the podcast, Barry and Chris. Thank you very much for inviting me here today to Burton Mill.
Yeah, good to talk to you about the mill and flour production.
Can you start by telling me a little bit about yourselves and how you got involved with Burton Mill?
Well, we moved here 10 years ago now, actually, because we thought it would be a good project for Barry as a retirement project. The building is a mill on 2 floors and accommodation on the top floor. And so it's our house. But Barry has renovated all the machinery to enable it to produce flour again from virtually nothing, really, from very poor condition. So it's been a project, and it's now we're producing flour for local shops and enjoying it very much. I've learned a lot about milling in the process.
Yeah, I can imagine. And can you tell me a little bit about the history of the mill?
Okay, so the mill, the site was originally a forge, a hammer forge. So the pond is actually a hammer pond, which there are many, many around. This is a particularly good one. It's a very big one. It's the largest freshwater area in West Sussex, but it's all spring-fed, so the water supply is reliable. And they used to use it for hammering pig iron into wrought iron. This is part of the Wealden iron industry, but the iron was not forged here. It was, or the furnaces were not here. They were nearby, so they used to bring the pig iron to Burton Mill, and then they would hammer it into wrought iron and then take it off somewhere else. That industry sort of started to die back in the 1600s, 1700s. And so by about 1780, that industry had pretty much finished. And so the foundations of the old forge became the foundations of the new mill. So using the same water supply, obviously new water wheels and things like that. So they built a mill on top of the where the forge used to be. And it ran as a flour mill until 1899, I think it was. The last miller was recorded here.
Okay.
And so around 1780 to 1890 something, as a flour mill. Four millstones. It would have been producing mostly probably feed wheat, animal feed, but it would also be producing flour from locally grown grains. And obviously, as the industry changed and the fashion was for white flour, white flour needed imported wheat, and so the rural mills struggled a bit. And so that's why this one would have closed. It was quite late closing. Some closed before that. Some kept going, but competition from the massive roller mills, steam-powered roller mills at the ports was just too much for these mills. So they carried on in some form or other. But very difficult. This one, owned by the local estate, it then turned into a power generator. So
okay.
So it was a power station from about 1900 to about 1930, when the mains electricity came. So it generated power for the big house just up the road.
And the big house, you mean Petworth?
No, the big house is Burton Park House. We're on the Burton Park estate, not the Petworth estate, and nothing to do with Lord Egremont. So this is a different estate, and this was the mill for that estate.
And the turbine which was used, very early turbine, which was used to generate that very early electricity for Burton Park House, is in our car park. It's out there.
Oh, wow.
And it was so ahead of its time that it was made in Ohio because they weren't making them in this country. It was imported, wasn't it?
Yeah, they did. I'd say, yeah, absolutely. It was made in Dayton, Ohio, in about 1895. So that carried on until the mains arrived and there was no need for it. And so the mill became sort of a project for the new owner of Burton Park Estate. And he thought he would restart milling. So he put in a new turbine, much more powerful turbine.
Did he make it into a sawmill, though?
Yeah, that's right.
It was in the 1930s.
But the belief was from the science histories is that he intended to restart milling. So he did a lot of work trying to get the mill going, but it never did. So he made it into a sawmill, and it just cut up trees and for firewood, basically. And that carried on until the 50s or 60s. And then there was a lot of problems with the dam, and the building was derelict for quite a while. And in late 1970s, the lady who lives next door, Mrs. Mills, she gathered together a lot of volunteers and the Industrial Archaeology Society, and got a lease of the derelict building from West Sussex, who then owned it, and installed some stones that she found in Wales, because the original stones, the building, in its very poor state, they had to be removed because the building was too weak to take the weight. So these stones were added, but they were added on the ground floor, so on a frame, on a hearse frame. Her son then ran it as a commercial mill until 1988. Yeah, somewhere around there.
Mid-1980s.
Yeah, mid-1980s. I think it was running about 7 years. And then he gave up milling. So the building was then abandoned again. And in the 1990s, it was leased out to a couple who then part converted it into a residence. But the milling was it never milled again until we arrived. Now, all the machinery had become sort of mouse infested and everything else. It's in pretty poor state. But we still have water. So turbine was working in 2016, I think. And then 2017, we did our first experimental milling. And that was quite an exciting time.
And Barry's a member of SIAS, which is Sussex Industrial Archaeology Society, and they have a mill section. So, of course, he's been able to get in touch with other people who know about milling. Of course, it's really by talking to people who've done it for many years that you actually learn. It takes a long time to actually get it right. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, I mean, yes, because, there's a lot of knowledge in mill writing. You need to know quite a few things, and obviously I didn't. But you can go and ask people now. We went to visit a few mills. I've seen quite a few, talk to people, find out how the machines work, and then obviously then have to modify them and get them working again. I mean, everything needed adjustment because hygiene standards have changed, shall we say. And so what seemed to be acceptable in the 70s, I mean, I presume they never had any inspections, but it was, I wouldn't have eaten the flour produced by this mill then. But so we've modified it in a way that you wouldn't be able to see from the outside. You can only tell if you take the machines apart.
Yeah. Okay.
And adding ventilation and things like that to try to reduce the dust in the air. Yeah. So it's all that sort of stuff was done.
I think milling in the past I think people perhaps had a romantic idea about how it was in the past. I gather that, from stuff I've read, that it could be quite horrific, milling and baking as well for them as professional bakers, because of the lack of ventilation and the dust in the air.
Yes, it was miller's lung, they called it. So if you managed to retain all your limbs, you usually died from lung disease.
Okay, on that note, we shall move on and I will ask about, how does the water mill work, particularly thinking of milling grain here?
Okay, so you just need power. The whole thing, milling started with people rubbing stones against some grain. But to do it at a larger scale, you need power more than just elbow power. So that's where water came in and wind as well. So it's basically a power source. When it was running as a mill from 1780, it had 2 water wheels. But because it was the configuration, because it was a previous forge, the water wheels were needed only to be quite small because we have a big head and quite a lot of water. So the small water wheels driving some big stones. And they just basically, the power just rotates the stones and grinds the wheat. And, it's just developed over time, but it's quite a simple process.
The water power comes from the pond, but the pond is not part of a river. So what happens is there are sluice gates in the pond, and by opening those, water comes under the road and drops down onto the turbine or onto the water wheel if you have a water wheel.
Oh, wow.
And that makes the turbine or the water wheel turn, and that wheel turning is attached to a sort of axle that goes across the floor of the ground floor, and then belts are joined to that axle, which are joined to the milling machinery, which makes it turn. So it's all about one wheel being turned by the water, and everything else comes from that wheel.
And how do you control the power of a natural resource like water? Is it just with the gates and things that you've just talked about?
Yeah, because we've got a turbine rather than a water wheel now, because the water wheels were taken out a long time ago. So the turbines are just controlled with a wheel. You just control the vanes within the turbine and it shuts off the water. So you just set the power. It's slightly more complicated here because we also generate electricity most of the time and only mill occasionally. So you wind a lever and it starts going round, and the further you wind it, the more power you get and the faster it goes.
That change of power is because as we turn a wheel inside the mill, vanes inside the turbine alter in angle, and that either shuts off the water or allows the water through, and that creates the power.
You'll be amused to hear this, I'm sure. I read, I think Dorothy Hartley wrote a book on, she wrote a book on food in England, but she wrote a book specifically on water and various aspects of it, from drinking water to, she does cover milling. And there was a bit in there about testing the flow of like a mill race, is that what you call them?
Yeah.
By dropping frogs in and seeing which one got there first, which seemed a very unscientific way.
Yeah.
She did say it was kind of like a folklore, not folklore, country law.
Yeah.
But I wasn't entirely convinced.
No, I think we're a bit more scientific
frogs.
now. Yeah, a bit more scientific. We can pretty much measure the water flow from the depth and the speed of flow, which you can still do with a stick, drop in a stick in, not a frog. But and then it will then you can gauge. But it's pretty evident. You know how much power you generate. We do, because we've got a generator on it. We know how much power it is, and it's all science. It's simple gravity. So you've got a head, you've got a weight of water, and that determines how much power it is. You've got a bit of loss in the system, but it works out. We've got plenty of water. We're very lucky at this time of year, and it's now winter. We can run the turbine 24 hours a day, and we would not run out of water. The pond level would not drop at all. But in the summer, there's much less water. And the millers in the old days, they would have been restricted as well onto how much they could run. But we have enough to charge the car and do the washing and stuff, heat the water. But we don't have enough to run it all the time.
Yeah.
So it doesn't vary. I mean, in the old days, I mean, there's other things. Is we have to look after pond level, and we have to look after the pond to some extent. So you can't lower the pond level now because,
For environmental reasons, really.
Yes, yeah.
For the environment, but there are various bodies, such as the Environment Agency and the local fishing club, and people who want the level of the water to stay the same, more or less the same.
Yeah.
So because there is the culvert over in the pond and also a sort of overflow weir, we know if the pond level is dropping below the weir level, then we don't use the water, because then there's no overflow.
Right.
So we're only using the overflow, if you like, water which would be going down into the river anyway. So.
Whereas in the olden days, when they were originally milling, if they were milling in the summer and they had a lot to do, they'd just run the level of the pond right down, and then it would fill up overnight or at the weekend. So, because they owned the pond, it's they could do these things. We don't own the pond, so we have to be very careful on how much water we use.
I think I've read before, it may not apply to somewhere like Burton Mill, but I have read that where you had mills, certainly along a river, I gather that you could have issues with flow if someone further down, or I guess nearer the source of the flow, started blocking off the flow. So was that an issue around here? Because there were lots of mills in Sussex at one point.
Well, yeah, so I don't think it was a problem here because the next mill was Duncton, which is about a mile away. And all the mills, because we're all spring-fed, they all have ponds.
Okay.
So, yeah, you would, when you were run-of-the-river mill, yeah, you were really stuck because if people would just build another mill on their property, it might be just hundreds of metres down from a previous mill. And then you're causing the water to back up. And they can't then, they lose their head, the head of water on their mill, so they lose power. So, and these disputes were rife, very common.
If you're a George Eliot fan, you may recall a scenario just like this occurring in Mill on the Floss. The miller, Mr. Tulliver, unsuccessfully tries to sue a local landowner for damming a stretch of the River Floss for irrigation purposes, thereby depriving Tulliver's mill of its fair share of the water power. As a result of Mr. Tulliver's failed suit, the family business disintegrates and he forfeits ownership of the mill.
And actually, there's a quite interesting history that a lot of the initial legal system came about through water disputes between millers. And so some of the early legal systems were created by people taking some mills taking other mills' water, and then they needed a system to resolve the dispute.
We're also lucky here that the pond level, or the pond's water, all comes from springs in the South Downs. And the South Downs are chalk, and which of course retain and hold water very well. So even in the summer, there's water within the hills, which then is coming out of the springs even through the summer. So our water level, and therefore the power of the water, is not really affected. Whereas on a river, of course, there could be a massive difference between the winter flow and the summer flow, which would affect the mills. Yeah.
Even with the aid of water power, milling corn was hard work. Think of Geoffrey Chaucer's description of the miller in the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, written in the 14th century. His miller was a stout churl, hardy and big of brawn and big of bone. Such was the strength of Chaucer's miller that he could heave a door from its hinges or break it through by running at it with his head. Not to be recommended, clearly. Hard work or not, there were perks to being a miller. Watermills were initially owned by a local landowner. This was usually a nobleman or the church. Tenants who grew wheat, barley or oats on their land were obliged to grind their corn at the manorial or church mill. The miller received a portion of the grain as payment for this service. In theory, this toll was strictly measured out, using a toll dish, with dimensions agreed originally by the landlord, then later market officials. But this did not stop some dishonest millers from pilfering more than their fair share. Hence Chaucer's line, he could steal corn and full thrice charge his fees, and yet he had a thumb of gold begad.
So you mentioned replacing the stones here back in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
What type of stone is used for millstones? And I ask this because I read in a cookbook from 1615 that Manship bread, or the finest white bread, is made from meal ground on black stones. So what difference does the type of stone make?
It's quite a big difference, and it's also a big difference in the grain as well. So I have no idea what a black stone is. Now, there were stones made of black silica many hundreds of years ago, but I think that's actually quite a poor material. In 1600, they might have been the bee's knees, but nowadays they're not. And the grain has changed. So the biggest difference is the grain. So in these mills, so 1780, when it was around, using an only locally grown English soft wheat, would have probably been gritstone, so Derbyshire gritstone, and that's fairly universal in the UK. as the cultivation of wheat improved, so the wheat became harder, the grains became harder, more like the imported wheat. Those soft stones, the grit stones, weren't really up to it. So they started to use what's called French burstone, which comes from the Marne Valley near Paris. And it's a very high quartz and silica-based limestone. And that's what we've got here. So they're just, they are the best now. And they're capable of milling the harder wheats that are now produced. Even in the UK, we just very rarely produce soft wheats now. So the millstones are very important, but we've got the ones that are reputed to be the best for the hard wheats, which everyone uses now for bread making because it produces much more spongy and fluffy bread rather than bricks, really.
So one question I've got, and it's something that comes up, I don't think it matters whether you're a food historian or not, but stone ground is better than mill ground. So I guess my question is it? Because obviously even in the supermarket you can buy supposed stone ground flour. And if it is better, why is it better?
Well, I don't know. I mean, a lot of traditional millers say it's better, and they talk about enzymes, but I don't know the science. I really don't. I mean, a stone ground, if you buy commercial stone ground flour, it will not be milled on French burstones or even grit stones. It will be using emery or carborundum or something like that. So a modern composite, which will be super efficient, very, very long lasting, and able to cope with high temperatures. It might be things like that. It might be the temperature of the milling on older stones. It's always going to be lower temperature. If you're running a big commercial factory, you're going to be using a lot of power just to get the throughput, just to get the economy of scale, really. So, but other people say it is good.
We've been told by several people in our journey of learning all about this that stone grinding, because of the way the stones work, one stone is fixed, one stone revolves, and there are grooves in the stones. So there's a sort of scissor action as the stone goes round. And that action, which creates the flour, is a more gentle process in terms of the enzymes within the grain. So more of the goodness of the grain is preserved by stone grinding. Whereas what took over from stone grinding was roller mills. Roller mills smash the grain more violently, and that destroys some of the enzymes that otherwise would be preserved. So that's I understand there to be a difference.
Yeah, I was talking about stone ground flour versus modern versus traditional mills. Yeah, let's use a different type of stone altogether. You'd never use this type of stone in a modern mill because they just don't last long enough.
No.
The French burstones with hard wheat would do about 80 tons of wheat and then have to be dressed. So over time they'll become dished. So very uneven, and they'll become blunt. So all of the furrows and little markings in the stone surface will be lost. And so the throughput goes down, probably the temperature goes up. So the things you don't want, so they have to be dressed. So it's another cost. In the old days, labour was cheap. You got itinerant dressers would go round and just to all the mills and do their stones and move on to the next mill. It's a rare skill now. Very few people are able to do it.
So once the flour's ground, obviously at that point you've still got a certain amount of bran in it. Mm-hmm. So how do you get to this lovely fine white flour that Gervase Malcolm was talking about in 1615 for manchette bread?
We take the wholemeal flour straight from stones into what's called a centrifugal dresser. So it's a big sieve that's got a fan inside it, and it can blast the wholemeal flour against what would have been silk but now is nylon cloth screen, it's called, and obviously all the particles which are small enough go through, and all the particles that are too big will fall out the end, and that's the bran. So, and French burr stones are pretty good at separating. So when they do this initial reaction, the bran breaks off and then doesn't get ground very much, whereas the endosperm gets ground quite finely. So the machine is able to pick out the two. So it's water-powered, just works reasonably well. I mean, it's a disaster commercially because the bran is something like less than 10% of the wheat. Our bran ends up about 22, 23% of the wheat. So we're throwing away a lot of flour. But we're also getting quite a little bit of bran in the flour as well. So our white flour will not make fluorescently white bread like a commercial flour, because it has got residual bran in it and germ as well. So it's a better tasting flour. But it is still more or less white.
Well, this is the thing with white flour, as I always say to people, or even in the past when they had white flour, it wasn't white like the flour you buy in a supermarket by any stretch of the imagination. So actually what you're producing, your white flour, is closer to what would have been produced.
And also, our flour doesn't have anything added to it.
Yeah.
It is just it's the inside of the grain, really, without the bran, basically. Yeah, it's a kind of creamy white in colour, but commercial white flour has all sorts added to it to make it whiter.
You can, even the heritage mills can, or traditional mills, can produce pretty good white flour. But they have to do it like a roller mill. You have to do a successive reduction. So you run through a first set of stones with a very wide gap. And so that breaks the bran off. Then you send it through a filtering process. So it scoops out the big lumps of bran. And then you end up with what's called semolina, semi-milled flour. And then you can pass that through another set of stones, which will mill it down into nice fine white flour. So that will have a very high extraction ratio, and has all the benefits. We don't have two sets of stones, so we can't run that type of process. But in a commercial mill, commercial stone ground flour has got this successive reduction. In a roller mill, it's 100% successive reduction. They just do multiple passes through machines, sieving each time, and they can extract it perfectly.
Before we sort of sat down to start recording, you mentioned the quality of flour and the protein, things that, how the grain has changed.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's all down to cultivation. I mean, the wheats that we're using now, what called Group 1, we're not organic. We're running just standard Group 1 wheats. So we're using Crusoe at the moment, which is a very hard wheat, which is only, wasn't possible to grow it in the UK climate, but they've managed to, cultivate these strands of wheat that are as good as imported wheat. But it's very much affected by the climate as well. So 1 year you can get proteins, around 12%, 12.5%. And another year you'll get 14.5%. And that's a big difference because the threshold for what's called milling wheat is about 13%. So if you don't have 13% protein, you're going to make quite a flat, it won't rise very well, the bread. So it's really important to get the high protein. And so a commercial mill or a commercial grain supplier will blend wheat. If the harvest in the UK is very poor, they will blend in some imported wheat just to raise up the protein level. And so it will produce a better flour. We don't have any mechanism for blending. We buy directly from the farmer. So we're a bit reliant on the climate and the farmer's knowledge of growing grain. And so it varies a lot. And it's not obvious how it varies because last year in 2024 winter, the 2024-25, it just rained and rained and rained. Much like it's done this year, really. And so the farmer was looking at his wheat and he was seeing a lot of root damage and he's just said it's going to be a disaster. And then we had a really dry spring. So that somehow the wheat sensed it was in trouble. And so it didn't produce many grains per plant. So bad news for the farmer, But because it didn't produce many grains, each grain had a higher protein in it. So that long, dry spell ended up producing a small quantity of very high quality wheat. So even in the UK, they've been producing absolutely fabulous organic wheat as well. So not only the non-organic Group 1s, but the traditional organic varieties were doing very well as well. So very much dependent on climate. You know, like all things with climate, you hit a positive, but there's probably bigger negatives coming down the line.
The farmer has also said to us in the past that if there's too much rain at a particular time of the development of the wheat, or too much sun and not enough rain, then that can affect the gluten level or the protein level negatively. It's not always a positive outcome. It can be negative as well. And the farmer can't necessarily predict what it's going to be. So it's definitely changing. The climate changing is affecting the grain, definitely.
And it should be said, the farmer that you get your wheat from is very close by, isn't he? Or
Yeah.
I say it's a he, it could be a she. But
No, it's a he. Yeah, he's farms. It's a rented farm, so it's on the Leconfield estate, which is the big estate around here. With so by the Lord Egremont, who's back with hounds. So it's his estate, and he produces 5,000 tons or something. So it's a massive grain, but he does save me a little bit of the best stuff. So which we mill.
And he's only about 4 miles away from here, so it's very local. Which is good.
The quality of grain used in milling has long been a concern for bakers, both in the commercial and domestic sphere. In her 1845 book, Modern Cookery for Private Families, Eliza Acton railed against the heavy or bitter or ill-baked masses of dough which appear at the table under the name of household or house-made bread. Good, light, pure bread, she maintained, was difficult to find, adding, "When a miller can be depended upon to supply flour of good quality and the other ingredients used in preparing it are also fresh and good, and mingled with it in due proportions, and the kneading, fermentation and baking are conducted with care and intelligence, the result will uniformly be excellent bread." Acton would go on to publish an entire book devoted to bread cookery, which includes a chapter on the importance of gluten in bread. Even in 1857, she notes that hard-grained wheat from countries like Poland was superior to that grown in England on account of its higher gluten content and nutritive value.
so what technological advances saw the decline of the watermill, and when did these occur?
I think it was entirely down to the preference for imported wheat and white flour. That was the decline.
It's the Industrial Revolution developing. So steamships could enable grain to be imported. And then the mills in the ports had roller mills on a large scale. So it's industrial development, really, that enabled grain to be milled away from the small local mills, and therefore much more cost efficiently.
Yeah, it's reliable energy as well. If you've got a steam engine, you can just run it all day. As long as you've got coal, you can keep running it. Whereas if you're a little miller, they're often one-man bands, and they rarely have enough water to mill for any length of time. But they'll spend some of the time milling, some of the time cleaning grain, some of the time bagging it up, some of the time delivering it. So in a whole day, they might only mill for 2 or 3 hours, which is probably coincides with the amount of water that's available. And then it has to recharge. But, when you look at a situation like that, it's not very efficient, and it's not scalable. So whereas if you've got a steam engine and you want more power, you buy another steam engine. It's really simple, but you can't put another river in next to your watermill.
No. Be a nice idea, but no, currently, as you say, we're recording this in the winter. There is rather a lot more water around than there would be normally in this part of Sussex. At the end of each episode, I ask my guests to contribute something to the season's virtual potluck supper. So what will your contribution be?
Well, my contribution would be our Irish tea bread that we make with our own flour on a very regular basis. It's very popular with our friends and family. It's originally an Irish recipe, which would have been called barn brack, or the Welsh call it birra brath. And it's a very simple recipe. Our flour works very well with it.
And you used brown flour here, didn't you?
Yes. It's a tea bread, so all the fruit that go into it are soaked overnight in tea with a bit of whiskey or something stronger in it, or Grand Marnier or something. And then in the morning, the next day, you really just add flour and a raising agent and eggs, and that's it. It's very simple and it's very lovely, and you can have clotted cream with it, or you can have butter. It's just a very nice thing.
And I can actually confirm that it is lovely because I've had a slice already. So thank you very much for that. It's rare that I actually get to try the contributions that were real. And what is next on the horizon for yourselves and Burton Mill?
So we mill every couple of weeks, and that's really about, again, a hygiene thing. It takes a long time to clean the mill after milling, but you can't clean all the flour out of the machines very easily. So you can leave it for a while. There'll be some residual grain in there, but we actually are very careful to stop any moths getting in and any bugs. But you do have to keep milling. Otherwise, you'll get accumulation of old flour in the machines, which would not be good. And then you have to take the stones apart, which is, is doable, but it's another half a day's work. So basically, we keep milling every couple of weeks. So we have a few all our customers are really local, within 5 miles, and we don't take on new customers.
We make about 50 bags of flour every 2 weeks. So that our customers, who are all little farm shops, really local, that's all they need between them.
Yeah, there's plenty of other things to do on the mill, mind you, because there's a lot of maintenance to do, and
Keeps you busy.
Yeah, so there's still a renovation. I want to get sort of all the residual sawmill machinery is some of it is still there.
Oh, wow.
One day I'll get that going. We haven't got the saw, but we've got all the belting and the shafting and everything else. So, and an old cleaning machine as well. So plenty to do.
And when's the next sort of Heritage Open Day? I know the Heritage Open Days happen in September, but isn't there a mill day?
There's a National Mills Weekend, which is the 9th and 10th of May, and we're open on May the 10th, which is the Sunday of that weekend. And there'll be mills like ours, which are not normally open to the public, which will be open on that weekend all over the country.
Brilliant. I'll make sure I put a link in the show notes for everyone so they can click on it and come and visit either yourselves or another mill.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time today. It's been really fascinating. And thank you also for the Irish tea bread, because that was absolutely delicious.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been nice talking to you.
Well, thank you for coming. It's very interesting to talk to you.
Thank you again to Barry and Chris for showing me around Burton Mill and talking to me about its history, not to mention the delicious Irish tea bread. You can find a link to that recipe in the show notes. You'll also find lots more information on the restoration of Burton Mill on their website, along with details of their forthcoming open days in May and September. If you enjoyed this episode, you may also want to check out the other podcast I'm involved in, A is for Apple, which I co-host with Dr. Alessandra Pino and Dr. Neil Buttery. Here's a bit more about the current season.
Hello, my name's Dr. Neil Buttery.
I'm Dr. Alessandra Pino.
And I'm Sam Bilton.
We're back with a brand new season of A is for Apple podcast.
An encyclopedia of food and drink.
Exploring the culinary alphabet one letter at a time.
This season, we've reached the letter C.
And as always, we've each taken our own path through it.
From rich dishes with long histories
to everyday ingredients with surprising stories.
And the comforting classics that bring it all together.
Each episode blends food, history and culture.
So whether you dip in at random
or follow the alphabet from start to finish,
there's always something new to discover.
Season C of A is for Apple is out now.
Follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
And start exploring. Be sure to pack your umbrella for the next episode as we plunge into the realm of the Mayan rain god Chak.
Rather than being a single entity, Chak, for example, has multiple aspects associated with his different roles as rainbringer. He can also appear as aspects of Venus as morning or evening star. He can be identified very easily by this very long downturned nose. He often carries an axe, which represents lightning.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you really loved it, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, as it really will help other listeners discover Comfortably Hungry. Don't forget to pop along to sambilton.com, where you'll find details on my books, which include my latest publication, Much Ado About Cooking, written in collaboration with Shakespeare's Globe. This new cookbook features recipes inspired by the food in the Bard plays and was huge fun to write, so I think it will be right up your street. You may also want to subscribe to the Comfortably Hungry Substack, which includes more detailed notes from the show. You can subscribe for free, but if you become a paid subscriber for £3.50 a month, you'll also get recipes inspired by the topics covered in the show and access to extra content. Alternatively, you can leave me a one-off tip via Ko-fi to show your appreciation. Just click on the relevant link in the show notes. Your support will help fund the research required to produce Comfortably Hungry. It also means that I can avoid including those pesky ads that may interfere with your enjoyment of the podcast. If you have any questions relating to this season's theme, you can leave a comment in the chat section of the Comfortably Hungry Substack page or tag me on social media. Remember, you can find me on Instagram, Threads and Blue Sky at Mrs. Bilton, that's with 2 S's. I'll be plunging back into the liquid world of food and drink history soon, but until then, take care. Comfortably Hungry is research produced and presented by food historian Sam Bilton, with sound mixing and production by Thomas Dinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast. Additional sound effects and music are provided by Zapsplat and Pom5.